Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. This episode, we are joined by Mr. Graeme Edge, co-founder and CEO of Energy Disruptors, a conference created to address the opportunities and challenges presented in the energy industry by connecting leaders who share their perspectives on technology, new business models, emerging global trends, and policies. In addition to the Energy Disruptors Conference, Mr. Edge is the founder and CEO of ScaleBlaze, an executive search firm specializing in clean energy, clean tech, energy transition, and e-mobility sectors. Mr. Edge also earned a bachelor's degree from King's College London. Among other things, we discuss going from a $250,000 loss to booking Richard Branson at the conference, and the journey thus far. This podcast episode is powered by ATB Capital Markets. ATB Capital Markets provides financial solutions and strategic advisory services to help businesses thrive. With a track record of successful deal execution, ATB is a full-service investment dealer with a deep understanding and commitment to the industries it serves. Visit atbcapitalmarkets.com for more information. This episode is brought to you by Upgrade Labs. Upgrade Labs offers a comprehensive range of cutting-edge performance and recovery services that have been proven to optimize your health in minutes, not hours. Whether it's accelerating muscle mass and bone density or addressing injury and inflammation, start your experience by booking a free cell health analysis at upgradelabs.com/Calgary. This podcast is brought to you by Energy United. Energy United is an organization with a mission to promote practical energy policy across Canada. Energy United is building a community of Canadians that are passionate about Canada's natural gas and oil industry and are willing to take action. Energy United is driving change on issues that matter, all the way from the carbon tax to the emissions cap. Join Energy United to make a difference at energyunited.ca. Good morning, Mr. Graeme Edge. Thank you very much for doing this. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
For the listener, you are the founder of Energy Disruptors. But what is Energy Disruptors?
So Energy Disruptors is a big future of energy event that we have hosted 4 times here in Calgary. It started as an idea I had on a flight coming back from Europe. And the kind of simple premise of the event is to bring together oil and gas in the same room as renewables, people from nuclear, people from the broader power industry, entrepreneurs, people from the world of finance. So think almost the energy incumbents in the same room as the energy disruptors and trying to break these silos down and really trying to get those groups to mix with a view to how do we accelerate energy and climate solutions at scale by having a better conversation and better collaboration around energy transition.
You're also the founder of an executive search firm too, if I'm correct.
I am, yes. That's my original career. So I've been involved in executive search for the last 20 years. Originally, I did a lot of work in oil and gas and power and utilities. And the last 6 or 7 years, very focused on the energy transition market. And our search firm is called ScaleBlaze. So I split my time between Energy Disruptors and ScaleBlaze, depending on kind of where we are in the event planning cycle.
Energy Disruptors is going well. The guest list of speakers is very impressive. So congrats.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, it's been quite the journey. I think we couldn't have imagined kind of how much it's scaled up and some of the people we've been able to work with. So yeah, it's been a pretty wild journey to get it to this point.
To go back, you're from Scotland originally?
I am, yeah. So I grew up in the north of Scotland near Aberdeen. So if you're not super familiar with the geography of Scotland, Aberdeen's on like the far northeast corner of Scotland, right on the coast. And really Aberdeen's claim to fame is the UK oil and gas industry is largely run out of Aberdeen. So weirdly, there's some quite a lot of parallels between Aberdeen and a place like Calgary because it's so dependent on the energy industry.
How'd you end up in Canada and Calgary?
So I ended up in Calgary because my wife, Michelle, who was my girlfriend at the time when we were back in Scotland, when Michelle finished university, we both kind of had this, I suppose, itch to travel. We didn't necessarily want to stay in Scotland. And Michelle's mum and dad moved to Calgary in 2005. And Michelle and I are big skiers, and we'd always kind of had this interest in Canada. And so it kind of worked out that with her parents moving here, we started visiting, loved Calgary, kind of fell in love with Canada. And it just so kind of worked out that career-wise, we were able to make the move and able to move to Calgary in 2007.
Got the executive search firm going then?
I was working so it wasn't my own thing at that time, but I was working for a UK-based search firm. They had an office in Calgary, and they basically said, hey, do you want to move to Calgary with us and help us scale the business? So that was, and then Michelle landed a job at Shell here in Calgary at the time.
Fell in love with the city.
Fell in love with the city, but it wasn't like overnight. If you'd asked me a year into being here,
it's a little cold.
Yeah, we were kind of like, it's pretty long winters, maybe we'll end up going somewhere else. But I think Calgary gets under your skin. And we were obviously just talking about this just kind of off camera beforehand. But it's just this place that is a great sense of community, super welcoming. It's more like a large town than a big city. And every year we spend here, obviously now I've been here 17 years, we just kind of more fall in love with the city and the community.
To get to Energy Disruptors. Maybe we'll start there.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Why did you start Energy Disruptors?
I think maybe like a lot of ideas, some of it was born out of frustration. So I'll kind of start there, and I'll take you back in time. So, as I mentioned, I was working in oil and gas executive search and doing a lot of stuff in power and utilities. 2015, obviously oil prices crashed, and the company that I was working for at the time was called Maxwell Drummond, and the parent company was in the UK. They ended up going into insolvency, and I was running the Canadian business. So it was this weird situation where I'm running this profitable Canadian business, but it was owned by now an insolvent parent. So myself and a couple of the team members that work with me, we decided to buy the company in Canada, mainly to finish the work that we had with our existing clients. And it was kind of this short-term plan of, we'll buy out the search business, we'll get the work done, and then who knows what we'll do next. So that was kind of early 2016. And I was at the time feeling probably a little bit lost in my career. And I was 35 at the time, and I was going, I don't know what I want to do with the rest of my life, but I'm not sure it's just doing energy-related executive search. And Michelle and I had just had our second kid at the time. And so I kind of had this frustration of what am I going to do next? And I got it in my head that I wanted to start an energy transition focused search firm. So what ended up happening was Michelle saw an event on social media that was advertised in the UK, and Richard Branson, the founder of Virgin, was headlining the event. And she kind of on a whim bought me a ticket and said, I think you need some inspiration. You're feeling pretty lost right now. I've seen this thing in the UK, and it's all these entrepreneurs that are going to be attending. I think you should go to this because I just have a feeling that it's going to be helpful. And so I ended up going to that event. That was in September of 2016. And a couple of things happened at that event that really led to Energy Disruptors. So one of them was I was sat right at the front row. There were 600 people there. Richard Branson walks out onto stage, and there's this British guy sitting next to me, this kind of older guy that would have been in his mid-50s. And we start chatting away during the breaks. And it turns out that he's one of the top electric vehicle experts in the world. So purely by chance, it was a guy called Roger Atkins. And we just struck up almost this instant friendship. And then on stage, there was a young lady called Holly Ransom who was interviewing Richard. And I remember Roger and I through the day were just going, we couldn't believe how incredible Holly was at interviewing and hosting the event. She was kind of emceeing the whole thing. So it was really these couple of things of seeing Holly, seeing Richard Branson on stage, meeting Roger. I was flying back to Calgary the day after, and I'd met all these amazing entrepreneurs, and I thought, I've never been to an event like this in North America. There should be something like this that has music and artistic performances and brings entrepreneurs together. What if we kind of took this concept but applied it to energy? Because the other thing was I'd been to a lot of energy events, and it was almost like watching paint dry, and I didn't necessarily feel super welcome, and it was always kind of the same people talking. So it was really, that was the inspiration. That was the original seed of the idea. of Disruptors.
Since this is a entrepreneurship and business podcast, I guess the question is, would Energy Disruptors be a business or is it nonprofit? How does the organization make money?
Yeah, happy to talk about that. So it's funny because you have an idea and you have that imposter syndrome of whenever there's something new, you kind of start questioning, okay, but why wouldn't someone else have done this? Do I have the capabilities to even do this? I was in a probably not in a great place mental health wise at the time. So you start having this imposter syndrome. So there's a few kind of baby steps that we took. The first being that we looked up the domain, energydisruptors.com. As silly as it sounds, I got home, talked to Michelle, shared the idea, and she kind of encouraged me and said, this sounds cool. Why don't we see at least if energydisruptors.com is available? It was like $15. So we bought it on the spot. And it's one of these things where that little one, almost baby step led to the next step. And very early on, we had to make that decision of, how are we going to do this? Because we'd never hosted an event before. We wanted to bring these diverse groups of people together. Should it be not for profit? Should it be a commercial entity? And I think we kind of fell on the side of it needed to be commercial. It needed to be a business to be sustainable. Because if it was not for profit, there's always that risk of one of your funders pulls out, basically you're done for. So we set it up as kind of what we kind of almost called like a profit for purpose, where it needed to be sustainable and financially sound, but it was going to be super impact driven. That was really the initial philosophy behind the event.
Do you remember your first Energy Disruptors conference?
I do, but maybe I can tell you a little bit about the lead up to it because I barely remember it. And that might sound a bit strange to say that. So, going back to kind of late 2016, all these things happen. It sounds a bit kind of almost like woo-woo, but you get these almost signs from the universe. We get the domain. I then reached out to Holly on LinkedIn and I basically said, like, I'm this random guy in Calgary. I've had this idea around this energy event, totally different format. I would really love you to come and host the event, but please, I want to be completely transparent. We've never done an event before in our lives. We don't have a lot of money. It's just an idea, but maybe you're willing to have a chat with me. And, it took a few weeks, but Holly got back to me and said, look, I'm happy to have a conversation with you and hear more about the idea. And again, it was one of those moments where, Holly lives in Australia, in Melbourne. We jump on Skype at the time because Zoom wasn't a thing. And we had this chat and I explained the idea. And Holly basically said to me, if you can do this, I'm in. I want to be a part of this because I think this sounds cool. So if you can pull this off. So again, it was another almost data point of someone validating the idea. And then we probably did a few things that were pretty unusual. So we decided, well, we need a big speaker to anchor this event that we're going to try and do. So what if we try to get Richard Branson, as kind of nuts as that sounds? So we ended up managing to get connected to Richard's team at his charity Virgin Unite. And effectively the deal was if Richard was going to come to the event, we would need to make a donation to Virgin Unite to kind of in lieu of his time to kind of recognize, he gets thousands of speaking requests. So we ended up making a huge donation to Virgin Unite completely on a flyer. Like we didn't have event dates. We didn't have any sponsors. We barely just set up the business at that time. And in hindsight now, knowing what I know, it was ludicrously risky and insane that we did that. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we kind of cleared out our bank account and went, screw it, we're going to have a go at this. And I then thought once we had him secured, it was going to be easy because, we'd had lots of sponsors wanting to be involved. It ended up, we went through this like nightmare of 18 months trying to get it off the ground. We had to cash in our pensions. We had to cash in our RSPs. We had to move the event dates 3 times. And all through this like process, our kids at the time were 1 and 3. So we had 2 toddlers at home. We're both working like 100-hour weeks trying to get this idea off the ground. And just the stress is building and building and building. So back to your question, can I remember the first event? I barely can because I did something else really dumb. I basically was drinking every night for that 18 months. I'd get home, feel like the walls were closing in. I'd run a bath, have like a double or triple vodka, try to numb the pain and the stress. I stumbled to the finish line on the first event. I've never been so exhausted in my life. At that first event, we lost $250,000 on the first summit. And I barely remember because I was so exhausted. And everyone's going, this is amazing. What a big success. But really the reality was for us personally, it was the toll was huge.
From a business perspective, the idea was to, between ticket sales, sponsors, and other revenue streams, by attracting people and speakers, eventually the company would generate a profit. In simple terms?
Yeah, I think again, it sounds super naive. We didn't really know. We knew that sponsorship was a thing. We knew that we'd need to sell tickets. So really there were two ways we're going to be able to generate revenue: landing sponsors and landing tickets. I mean, it's laughable. I look now at some of our first sponsorship decks and assets from 2017 when we were trying to land sponsors, and I'm so embarrassed by them. And I'm absolutely amazed that companies actually came in, because in a way, if I was looking at it through their eyes, they would have gone, who are these random people with no events experience doing this thing called Energy Disruptors that sounds super risky, that has live music and artistic performances in this weird format, and they have no track record whatsoever. That doesn't sound like a great way to allocate your sponsor dollars. But the remarkable thing was that there were a number of companies and people that took a gigantic leap of faith and for whatever reason believed in the idea and decided, we're going to support you guys, even though this is like super, super risky. So the sponsorship was really probably the first critical thing. And then the ticket revenue was obviously really important, but the ticket thing was really scary because we're selling tickets and we're going, but what if we can't do this? What if we had to cancel the event? I don't want to take people's money and then we're going to have to refund them. And when we were having to move the event dates, basically it was because we hadn't raised enough money to actually produce the event. So we'd have to go back to Richard's team with our tail between our legs and say, hey, JK, sorry, we can't do the event. Hey, can you give us a new date? He's available. And you can imagine we were wrangling with credibility and this was obviously adding a lot more stress. So back to your question, the commercial model was try to win sponsorships and try to sell lots of tickets. The sponsorship strategy we landed on was, rather than trying to land, 50 partners at $10,000 or $20,000, let's try and land 10 partners at a really significant investment of, $100,000 plus. And then we got less partners to manage. They've got more skin in the game. And the brands that we attract are real high quality versus lots of tiny little companies. And so, but again, that took a lot more time to kind of land those partners.
So I'm guessing things have turned around. It's business has been on a profitable trajectory since the first time you did it.
It has. I mean, thankfully, the money we lost in the first one, we basically were able to make up on the second one.
We're still here.
We're still here. We're still surviving.
Yeah. I
mean, it was one of these things where we came out 2018 and we basically said we will never do that again because it just took too much. And I used to think burnout was a made up thing. And that I genuinely came out of that. And I couldn't hold conversations with people properly for the 2 or 3 months after the event. It really took me at least 6 months and also Michelle, 6 months to recover. Yeah. And the kids, and we were kind of going, we're missing this time in their lives where it sounds crazy. Michelle would be breastfeeding and working on her laptop at the same time. And we're both just working all hours and we're stressed. And yeah, it was really rough. What ended up happening was over that kind of 3 to 6 month period after the event, we had all of our sponsors start reaching out to us and saying, you have to do this again. We absolutely loved it. We'd never been to an event like this. This is a really important thing for the city. What will it take for you to do this again? And we could somewhat flippantly kind of say, well, you'd have to at least double your commitments from what you did. And all of them did it and said, we'll double our sponsorships because we want to see you guys do it again. And I was very transparent with them around financially how tough it was. So really 2019, the second one that happened in September, the first one was May of 2018. 2019 was somewhat trying to prove to ourselves that the first one wasn't a fluke. And the other big thing that happened was the first one won Canada's Best Conference, first time out, which no one had ever done before. Normally it'd been an established event that would have picked up an award like that. So that happened. The sponsors said, we're going to support you guys and kind of double our commitments. We went into 2019 and it was easier planning wise. 2019, we worked with Malcolm Gladwell and some other kind of really amazing people. And we kind of grew the event from about 1,700 people that were the first one to about 2,500 people were at the 2019 one. And we were flying. We had sponsors saying to us, we want you to take this global. This was the 2019 one was even better received than 2018. We were thinking, oh, we've really cracked the nut here. And the business was starting to do financially better. And we all know what happened in early 2020.
Yeah.
And it was like the carpet being pulled from under our feet.
So what'd you do?
So, I think 2020, first 6 months, I was pissed off. I was really depressed because I felt quite resentful because we'd spent the last 3 years of our lives basically killing ourselves, trying to get this idea off the ground. We had huge momentum, and then it sounds really selfish now because obviously it was brutal for so many people and we were really fortunate compared to most people. But once I got over that, and the thing that really helped was I ended up getting invited to be a judge on a hackathon competition. And this was in May of 2020, so a couple of months into the pandemic. And I think it was SAIT or the UFC hosted this thing. And they said, we want these young people to come up with ideas to help the city through early COVID. How do we generate revenue for businesses? How do we try to do things even though the health restrictions were super strict? And Graeme, can you be a mentor or like a judge for the tourism category? And I'm going, I don't know the first thing about tourism. Why on earth would you want me to be involved with this? And the team that I ended up mentoring won the hackathon. And then we basically said, why don't we actually get this idea and see if we can do something with it? And the idea they had was to do a huge community scavenger hunt that would involve local businesses. And this was going to be a 6-week scavenger hunt where you had to complete 250 challenges. And I thought it was a kind of cool concept. And what we ended up doing, Michelle and I basically called all our major partners and said, will you chip in some money to support this hackathon idea? And before we knew it, within a week or two, we had $200,000 committed to this scavenger hunt. And we then decided we were going to help design this. And we had 7,000 Calgarians do this like 6-week scavenger hunt. And that initiative raised about $500,000 for different local businesses because people would have to complete a certain challenge, like buy 2 ice creams at Village Ice Cream and then go to this other part of the city and do this thing. And because they had to go and purchase goods, they would then complete the challenge. And the winning team would get like $10,000 of vouchers for local businesses. That project really like sparked me back into life. And really the first 2 years of COVID was about kind of surviving. And we made the decision, we're not going to do a virtual edition of Energy Disruptors. We're going to wait until the health situation improved. And so we brought the event back in September of 2022. But it was 2 years of basically waiting around and moving dates and trying to figure out, can we bring it back?
And you started with an incredible headliner, Richard Branson, which sets the bar very high.
It did, yeah. And I think, the positive of that story was we didn't have any credibility, but Richard obviously had huge credibility. So that then rubs off on you because you cross this line of super credibility with people. So that was huge with the sponsors. That was huge with the audience. You have that kind of almost stardust and celebrity factor. And what it also did was for future years, when we were going to then work with like Malcolm Gladwell or Adam Grant or some of the other folks that we've had speak at the summit, they then go, oh, well, Richard Branson's spoken at your event. It must be good. So I would be happy to then consider it. So it was massive for us. That was like the biggest thing we could have ever done in terms of how we started. We basically, it probably shrunk the scaling process by 5 years. And, in terms of you come out the gate at 2,000 people, if you'd done it bit by bit organically, it would have been probably a 10-year journey.
This podcast episode is sponsored by Connate Water Solutions. Do you need cost-effective water sourcing options to supply your next drilling or completions program? Connate Water Solutions is a specialized hydrogeology company focused on water well drilling, testing, and water management services in Western Canada and Texas. Contact info@connatewater.com or check out connatewater.com for more details. This podcast is brought to you by Rare Oilfield Services. Rare is a locally owned company that specializes in redeployment of surplus oil and gas production equipment through buying, selling, and refurbishing. Rare has a large shop that can restore anything including separators, tanks, line heaters, knockouts, and treaters. Whether it's reconditioned, new, or used equipment that you're in the market for, contact rareoil.com for more information. So fall of 2022, then 2023, and then you had one this spring, 2024?
Yeah, so what happened was 2022, we made the decision we're going to bring the event back, and we worked with Adam Grant and Aaron Brockovich that year. It was a nightmare planning it, because normally the previous events had taken about a year to plan. The 2022 one we planned in 4 months. So you're condensing a year of work in 4 months. We couldn't get insurance. We couldn't, if we had to cancel because of the health situation, we were then refunding all the tickets without any insurance. 2022 was more difficult than the first one, 2018. And you're also trying to, it was just the logistics around the speakers alone was we had 120 speakers and about half of them were coming from out of market. So you're thinking, what happens if a person can't make it because they get COVID? So we came out of 2022 and we then made the decision we were not going to do 2023 because there were 2 reasons. One was the World Petroleum Congress was coming to Calgary in 2023. And the other reason was the BMO expansion was under construction. And we said, we're going to wait for the new venue and we're going to wait till 2024 and we're going to move from the Big Four to the new BMO Center. And so 2024 was the 4th one that we did.
You've met a lot of good speakers. What makes a good speaker to you? And what is quality on stage? How do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a really tricky one because I'd say the speakers that have really stood out, that are not necessarily like the biggest names. So what we try to do is we think about the program like a story arc. So it's a 2-day program. How are we going to open? What's the middle part of the journey we're going to take the audience on? And how are we going to close? We don't think of it like 12 or 15 separate sessions. We think, what's the emotional journey? A bit like if you're reading a book, you have the dark soul of the night, you have all these pieces that make a great book. And this is really Michelle's genius because Michelle's hugely creative. She's a big writer and she kind of looks at this like a giant play or a giant performance. So who are going to be the right people to open? Who are going to be the right people in the mid part of the program? Who are going to be the right people to close? What is the feeling we want to evoke in people as they leave? Once we know that rough story arc, then we go, okay, what's the type of talent, what's the type of speakers that we think are going to work really well? And what's going to be the right format for them? Because you could be an amazing panelist, but you might not be a great TED Talk presenter. You could be amazing over fireside chat, but you're not necessarily going to be a great moderator. And so we look at every single role and we make the decision of what's the right format for this particular speaker and what's going to deliver fresh insights. And we had probably maybe an unfair advantage, but Holly, who I obviously mentioned, who ended up, she's now one of my co-founders, but originally obviously was the host of the summit. Holly's possibly the world's best event moderator. So you have this person who is incredible at pulling out insights and emotions from speakers. And the other thing we'll do is we'll track about 1,000 speakers and we'll look at what are they doing? What are they talking about? What's the best format? And then we start to make a decision on who we're going to select. Back to your question, what makes a great speaker? It needs to be someone that can evoke emotion. It needs to be someone that can bring new insights. Ideally, those insights are founded in science and reality. And it needs to be someone who, ideally, you have charisma and passion. And I think if you can marry those things together, that's some of the ingredients that make an amazing speaker.
Not necessarily the loudest person dancing around on stage, making a big show.
No. Yeah. I'll give you a very specific example of a speaker that really surprised us that we didn't know that this would land. 2019, we had a speaker, a guy called Michael Paulin. Michael's one of the world's top architects. And he came to the event and talked about something called biomimicry, which is how do we learn from nature as we're then designing buildings and systems and it's, he's this leading biomimicry expert. 99% of our audience would have had no idea around biomimicry. People loved his TED talk. It was only 18 minutes and he just nailed it. And people still talk about that 2019 talk. Even though the link to energy, you might think that's kind of tangential. He was like the star of the 2019 show. We had no idea coming in that would have been the case. I had one thing that makes a big difference. When the speaker is coming in somewhat knowledgeable about what we're doing and we've personally connected with them, that makes a massive difference. Because if they know the origin story and why we're doing this, then I think they show up in a better way and then you're more likely to have a successful outcome.
Speaking of reality, the title of the conference is Energy Disruptors, but in reality, traditional energy demand rises every year. Oil production's at a record high in Alberta.
Yeah.
So how do you balance the themes of traditional energy with new innovative technologies at the conference?
Yeah, great question. And this to me is like in any story arc, you need tension. So one of the things we've tried to figure out is, okay, energy transition is a controversial topic. There's a lot of opinions around the future of energy. We have stakeholders who are very much in kind of the traditional camp. We have stakeholders who it should be the end of fossil fuels and we all are going to be living on renewables, and we have everything in between. And what we've tried to do is, if you think about those viewpoints, we almost ignore the 10% extremities on each side or the 5% extremities. So the very extreme views, we go, we're actually not interested in capturing them. They're not our audience. But that middle 90%, maybe you call it like the radical middle, that is the group we're trying to communicate with. So how do we bring stakeholders across the spectrum? Our content then needs to reflect the diversity of those views. And we need to create debate and interesting content that's going to be appealing. And our job is actually to open up the thinking of both sides of the equation and get these groups to actually see the perspectives of those other people. Because if we're not doing that, what is the point? We're basically communicating in echo chambers. And it's almost like, how do you create an environment then where you create respectful disagreement and respectful debate? And the other things we will do is we want to create an environment that's exciting and engaging, because it's not just about dryly delivering your point of view. If you can do it in a way that's engaging, then it's more likely you're going to actually get those people who disagree with you to actually at least open up their thinking a little bit. So we're very intentional about how we try to design the content. And we're very much coming at this from a point of view of, if we're going to see improvements around emissions and acceleration of energy transition, we're going to need multiple solutions from multiple sectors. And the lazy narrative is going to be one solution that solves all this. And basically the summit is not about that. The summit is about, we're going to need solutions from every part of the energy value chain. That's really one of the big beliefs behind the event. And everyone is welcome except those 5% wingnut extreme. I would say the extreme people who are disrespectful, they are not welcome. But the people in the middle, the 90% in the middle, that's the people we want to engage with.
It's not a zero-sum environment. Some of the best technology actually comes from the traditional energy industry through R&D spending, for example.
Yeah, and this is not, I think if you demonize people, you immediately lose them. So really, I don't see a lot of value in demonizing the oil and gas industry. We oil and gas is really critical. We're living in record demand. That is the reality of the situation we're in. We need to understand how can we do better, but we're still going to have a very heavily fossil-based supply and demand here for the next 40, 50. We don't know.
Yep.
We don't know.
Exactly.
But we got to move the needle and also be better. But we also need to be open to really new innovative ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to be doing both. We should be doing both. How do we get better in terms of hydrocarbons and molecules? But how do we embrace electrification, particularly in applications where it makes more sense than a molecules-based application? That's a big central thesis. But this is not me or our team. This is let's go and bring in the best people in the world all along these value chains to deliver insights in these areas, because we're not technical experts. Our strength is in how do you bring this together from a storytelling perspective? How do you create the environment? How do you communicate, engage with these different parts of the community? It's not to deliver the technical insights. And so one other thing I'd also mention is we beat to death the technologies and the economics. A huge part of the summit is about society, human factors, culture, impediments to change. It's not just about technologies or the economics, because that's not how decisions get made solely in the world. There's more to it than just that.
How do you view the role of disruptive innovation in energy? Do you see opportunity in one part of the sector over others, or for instance, carbon capture or electrification?
I think we tend to conflate true disruptive innovation with continuous improvement. So the first thing I say is there's a difference between something that's truly groundbreaking and really going to change the game versus something that's how do we take an existing idea and make it a lot better and a lot more efficient. And people like to think both those things are innovation, and maybe they're different forms of innovation. But when you get into what is disruptive innovation, this is something that really is going to have a transformative impact on this particular vertical. So again, we're trying to do both. We're interested in those kind of moonshot ideas because I think as a species, we gravitate more to the exciting like flying cars and the next generation nuclear fusion reactors than someone saying, I'm going to create a better amine process for capturing CO2 that's going to make it go 5% better. That piece of content probably is not going to be as interesting for a lot of audiences a next generation, nuclear fusion or nuclear fission reactor. But both these sides are really important. So we're trying to pay attention to both. There's some cool stuff obviously happening in the world of molecules and hydrocarbons, and there's some really exciting stuff happening in the world of electrons. And I like to think of disruption as basically where the world of electrons meets the world of hydrocarbons. That meeting point is where you're getting disruption in the energy market. 2 years ago, none of us were talking about AI and energy demand. This year is one of the biggest themes at the event. So what we also try to do is we try to plan our content really late. So, some events you'll see they'll announce their agenda a year out and it's minute by minute. I kind of laugh at that and go, we won't announce our full agenda until 2 or 3 days before the summit. We're making speaker decisions up until 1 or 2 weeks out from the event because we want the content to feel timely and super fresh. We also want to be slightly ahead of where the world is on the content. We want to be thought-provoking.
Without giving away your next year's lineup, are there any themes you're thinking about?
I think there's, again, it might sound strange, but right now it's more we've got like speaker ideas and people we really want to work with that we wanted to work with for a long time. So probably less so on themes.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, it's more, there's probably 15 to 20 people that we're going, we've approached them multiple times. For whatever reason, it hasn't lined up logistically or dates or we haven't had the right connections to be able to reach them. I mean, you've got some very high-powered listeners listening in. I'll throw it out there. I'd love for us to work with Bill Gates. It's kind of fascinating what he's doing from an energy and climate perspective. He is someone on our radar in a big way. To be able to make that happen, you're going to need someone in his inner circle you need to go to Calgary and be a part of this thing. I think it'd be fascinating to have someone like Sam Altman on stage. And then this kind of a list. And, people like Patrick Collinson from Stripe. They're doing some such interesting work in kind of the carbon markets. And there'd be 20, 30 other people that are super interested. We'd love to, example, work with Vasov Smil. I've got to know him a bit over the last couple of years.
He's Canadian, I think.
He's Canadian, yeah. He lives in Manitoba. He's a great person. There's complexities around, he's 81 years old. He's 80 years old. And so there's always factors that are kind of complex, but there's some people that hopefully at some stage we'll have them on our stage and participating at the summit. And if there's people listening in who want to help, reach out. That would be awesome.
You live in Calgary, so you have a sense of the energy realities, like we mentioned, with record high oil output and demand. But you also meet a lot of people outside of Calgary who may have different opinions. Do you notice a big gap between the reality and what some people view as the incorrect narrative on energy? And
I think there's obviously it's super divergent views on 100%, but I also think it's not like this homogenous thing where everyone from Calgary has this certain opinion around. I'll give you an example. When we launched in 2018, we were thinking, is anyone going to be interested in energy transition, the future of energy? Are 50 people going to show up? It really surprised us, the reaction from the community, the positive reaction of how many people are so curious about what's happening. I'm always skeptical when people try to make predictions too far into the future. So I suppose what I'm more interested in is I'm really just trying to find curious people that are open-minded. And we're seeing, obviously, yes, there's this reality of where global energy demand is right now. But we also don't necessarily have a super clear picture of what things look like in 20, 30, 40 years. There are probably some fundamentals that are going to be pretty sound. But really, I'm interested in people who are open-minded, curious, want to learn as much about molecules as they want to learn about electrons, want to learn as much about artificial intelligence as they want to learn about how you deal with stakeholders or how you communicate with people. Here's the one thing we do know. We're going to have to build a shit ton of infrastructure over the next 30, 40 years. And if we can't get that infrastructure built, that is a huge problem. And we've got to be competitive, and we've got to be able to communicate and demonstrate the value of that new infrastructure. We've got to be working with communities. We've got to speed up the process of how we do that. Those are the kind of things that I'm interested in. So I see like massive variations in viewpoints, but I think the people that I tend to gravitate towards are the people who are going to be curious and open-minded.
One comment I've read is that, in fact, we'll need all energy: nuclear, natural gas, oil, solar, wind, geothermal, everything. The rate that human energy consumption is going.
I would largely agree with that. I think that you also have different resource endowments around the world. So the way that Alberta is going to generate electricity is going to be pretty radically different to a heavy kind of hydro jurisdiction. So to me, it's what's that natural resource endowment? Is this a good application for fossil fuels versus electrification? Where's the low-hanging fruit where we can reduce our emissions? The area that no one really wants to talk about, and maybe it's because it's not particularly exciting, is things like energy efficiency. This is something obviously Vaclav Smil is super focused on. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit around things like food waste. There's a lot of emissions associated with wasted food and the production and the transportation of that food. There's a lot of waste around buildings and how we're heating things. But we tend to want to focus on like the wacky stuff or the crazy stuff first. So there's basically a lot of work that we're going to have to do, and we're going to have to be a lot more efficient around how we use energy. But as we're seeing, we are living in this hugely energy hungry world. And again, we wouldn't have predicted, I think any of us 3-4 years ago, that we were going to see AI be such a huge kind of consumer of electricity in North America, and really take us from kind of an electricity market that was pretty stable and pretty modest growth, or pretty flat, to suddenly a situation where you're seeing 10, 11, 12% annual demand in places like PJM. It's pretty remarkable, and it's unpredictable.
What's the future of Energy Disruptors? To keep doing annual events and growing?
Well, I think it's like the way I try to think about it is the event is an outcome of what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is drive positive change, We're trying to place Calgary at the center of this energy transition conversation globally. We're trying to create a space where the best of Canada meets the best of the world. How do we bring some of the world's most exciting entrepreneurs to Calgary each year and to be a part of this conversation? How do we break down these silos? How do we improve the discussion and the discourse around energy? The summit is just one of the ways to do that. So I think what's next is we've got to keep that bigger mission in mind. If I fall into the mindset of trying to make an events business, I actually quickly get demotivated and I'm not that interested in doing that. So I almost think first, here's the vision. I get fired up by that because that's pretty audacious and is pretty exciting. And producing the best possible summit is a part of that. So I think what's next is how do we continue to increase the impact of the summit, the main summit? But we're going to probably be doing some other things and leveraging the brand that we've built to go and do some other things, whether that's some smaller events or whether that's completely adjacent things to be determined.
We kind of talked about it before we started, but how important has being in Calgary been to the event, with being surrounded by an entrepreneurial community with like-minded people that supports industry? Have you noticed that it's helped?
It's been massive, is the short answer. I don't think there's many places in the world where a random little Scottish dude with spiky hair can go in and walk in and pitch a pretty half-baked idea and people go, I like this and I'm going to cut you a check and support you. That, honestly, name another city that you could do that in. Now in hindsight, you go, it was amazing. The people, here's the other thing, you can never do this in the UK, because here's the other thing that is true about here that wouldn't be true in the UK. People in the UK are very protective of their networks. They wouldn't be willing to open up their networks because they're too worried about losing social capital. Here, if someone likes you and thinks, okay, this idea's got a bit of merit, I'm going to go and introduce you to my friend. I'm going to introduce you to this CEO I know. I was always blown away by that. And that still continues to be true in Calgary. So it has been a massive factor in us being able to get this scaled to where we're at today.
What lessons did you learn with working with Richard Branson? Do any stick out? It's not every day you meet somebody like that.
You know, it's so ridiculous. I actually barely remember meeting him. And I remember being so nervous. I was so awkward, like really awkward around him. Because I grew up obviously with, and particularly for Brits, Branson was such a he was the entrepreneur, the kind of icon, taking on British Airways and doing all these crazy stunts back in the day with Virgin and his record business. And when you think of Virgin, you think of Branson. They're one and the same. So of everyone we work with, he's the one that I was most starstruck by. I've read all his biographies and all the stuff he's put out. Probably the biggest thing I learned was a willingness to say yes and go for it. And we probably a bit channeled that spirit, especially in that first year of when, okay, we got to kind of screw it and have a go. That's probably the biggest takeaway I had. And what else is really interesting about him? You would think he's this raging extrovert. Actually, when you meet him, behind the scenes, he's actually very introverted. He's not this. There's almost a persona publicly, and then he's actually very, very introverted and quite quiet, which was a surprise. Unless it was just me, and he was reflecting how awkward I was being. But yeah, he's pretty introverted.
Are there any personal experience or mentors that have significantly influenced your perspective on the event and energy and innovation? Is there anyone that's really impacted the course of things so far?
Yeah, definitely. Trying to single people out is tricky. There's a group of about 12 people that I kind of lean on for advice, who would be people who, not all of them are in energy. Some of them are doing, some are entrepreneurs in other areas. But these are people who, along the way, if we're facing certain problems or we're trying to figure something out, I'll pick up the phone to them, we'll go for a coffee, and I won't necessarily name them just because I don't want to miss anyone. But there's been this core group who are almost the OGs of Disruptors, who have been there from the beginning, who have just been this amazing group that have been supporting and helping us. So yeah, definitely try to tap into that knowledge. And here's the thing, try not to repeat the mistakes. And what can I learn from people who are further ahead on that entrepreneurial journey?
Would you view it as an entrepreneurial journey?
I think how I think about this has probably changed over time. I think it used to be very point A to point B. So, and what I mean by that is once we do this, we will have been successful. Once we achieve this, we've crossed the finish line. 6, 7 years in, what I've realized is the finish line just constantly moves into the future. And it's different frustrations, different problems, as cliched as that sounds. And I think when I think of it in that binary way of A to B, I think it's really damaging from a mental health perspective. What I'm trying to lean into is, oh, this is a way of life. I'm basically unemployable. And I need to just accept that I'm going to do my own thing. And there's going to be times where we have to chew a lot of freaking glass and dig in. And it's a dangerous place when I think we're close to the finish line or when we're thinking we can grasp success. I think that's a dangerous narrative. I think what I'm trying to just go, how do I become a better entrepreneur? How do I better manage the stress? And how do I create a bit more balance? And how do I, rather than always working on the ideas, on the businesses myself, how do I build capacity in our team and demonstrate true leadership where there's a lot of other very talented people who actually have a lot better ideas than me? How do I get the best out of them? That I'm kind of in the middle of that right now, trying to make that shift. And when I find myself retracting backwards, I get very upset and feel like I'm almost like, am I wasting my life? Have I wasted 6 years? Are we ever going to make it through all this pain? That's sometimes where you can get to in that negative headspace.
Are there any books or resources and or experiences that has shaped your understanding and leadership and direction of Energy Disruptors?
100%. So there's a recent book that I read, I don't know, a month ago that I loved. So I probably read 25 to 50 books a year, depending on what's going on. And I like a lot of kind of business related books. I read a bit of fiction, but mainly nonfiction. So this is a brilliant book. It's called Unreasonable Hospitality by a guy called Will Guidara. And it's basically the story of how Will and a guy called Daniel Hume, who's one of the world's top chefs, took One Madison Park from like this middle of the road bistro to the world's #1 restaurant over an 11-year period. And it's all about the unreasonable lengths they went to fulfill their almost customer promise. I've never read anything where people were more obsessed about a customer experience, and they would do the most crazy thing. I'll give you one quick example. So there was a Spanish family who came into the restaurant in New York, and during dinner it starts snowing, and the kids, I don't know, 13 or something, and they're looking out the window, and these Spanish kids have never seen snow before, and they're like completely blown away. So Will and his team got one of the staff to go out and buy a bunch of sleds. So after dinner, they could take the family to Central Park to go sledding. They would just do these types of things where you would go, it's almost irrational, the extent to which they try and make their customers happy. So I'm definitely drawing a lot of inspiration from that book around how we think about the guest experience for the event. Very quickly, a couple of other books for me that are like classics. Shoe Dog is epic. Andre Agassi's autobiography, Open. Don't need to be into tennis. I think it's actually an amazing book about like entrepreneurship and mindset. Steve Jobs' biography by Walter Isaacson's another classic. So yeah, these would be some of the books that for me have been really impactful.
Oh, this is great. I really appreciate your time. Unless there's anything else you want to add, we can.
I don't think so. It's been a bit of a therapy session. I feel lighter walking out of here. So thank you for the free therapy session. And yeah, we really enjoyed being on the show.
Hello, listeners out there. Thanks for checking out the podcast. Hopefully the episode provided some insights. If you enjoyed the show, check out trose.ca where more episodes are yet to come. You can also subscribe to the podcast where your token of support is much appreciated. Until next time, happy coffee drinking.